It's a truism that every time you shuffle the pack, and look, this wasn't a reshuffle, this was Andy's first cabinet, but every time you make these kind of changes, you risk anger. Well, you do anger far more people than you ever please. That's why no prime minister does these things lightly.
Let's pick up on that point I was discussing with Anna about Darren Jones's social media intervention, raising many eyebrows inside the Burnham cabinet, I'm sure, and outside too, suggesting that the VAT cut on energy bills that has been announced by the Prime Minister is unfunded. It seems that Andy Burnham may have created some potentially powerful critics on his own backbenches by his thorough purge of the Starmerites in cabinet. Let's speak to someone who was part of Team Starmer, that is James Lyons, former Downing Street Director of Strategic Communications for Keir Starmer, now a senior partner at Penta Group, the consultancy. James Lyons, thanks for joining me on The Times at 1. How surprised are you by Andy Burnham's decision to get rid of so many of the most loyal political allies of Keir Starmer?
Well, if you look back at the last time the Labour Party transitioned to a new leader in government, which was from Tony Blair to Gordon Brown back in 2007, the numbers involved were fairly similar. I guess what's different this time is there are so many people who are so closely associated with Keir Starmer who have departed the government, not just Rachel Reeves, but characters like Jenny Chapman and Nick Thomas-Symonds, who've been there from the very get-go, the long marchers, if you will. And I think that's what has unsettled people who have worked closely with Keir in the past.
How furious, as a director of comms as you were for Keir Starmer, how furious would you be if on day one of a new premiership, and you were working for that new premiership, a newly fired cabinet minister, a high-profile one, comes out on social media and makes a really quite serious criticism of the first signature policy that you've announced?
I think incandescent would be the word. They'd be peeling me off the ceiling. But look, the point is that some of the people who have just rejoined the cabinet or been promoted don't have entirely clean hands on these things. Some of them have departed government in the past and not always sought to make a success of it afterwards. So I think that's where the Starmerites would sort of be, making their argument.
How big a problem could this become? Andy Burnham went into number 10 saying he wanted to be a unifier. He was sick of all of the sort of briefings and the political games being played behind the scenes. He did not want that for his Labour Party and his government. How much of a danger is there that not just Darren Jones, but others, you could think of other people who've been fired with a high profile, from Rachel Reeves, David Lammy, Peter Kyle. I mean, how much danger is there that there's a lot of powerful people with reason to be resentful now inside Parliament, inside the Labour Party?
Well, it's a truism that every time you shuffle the pack, and look, this wasn't a reshuffle, this was Andy's first cabinet, but every time you make these kind of changes, you risk anger. Well, you do anger far more people than you ever please. That's why no prime minister does these things lightly. But look, I would gently point out that Wes Streeting, who obviously wanted to fight Andy Burnham for the leadership, he's back in cabinet. Pat McFadden is still there, who obviously, was one of the joint architects of the election win and therefore worked incredibly closely with Keir Starmer. He's in there, and we haven't seen the kind of middle-ranking and junior members of the government yet.
Keir Starmer couldn't keep his parliamentary party together and united, and that was a big part of his political downfall on all sorts of things, including welfare reform and other things. Do you think Andy Burnham will be different and more successful?
Well, I believe that he can be, but I think one of the things that will be upmost in his mind is the need to engage intensively and constructively with the Parliamentary Labour Party. He did move to build bridges with the PLP very early on. He talked about turning the Whip's office into an HR department. He talked about the mistakes that have been made over Gaza, which will have gone down very well with large sections of the Parliamentary Labour Party. So I think he's very much well aware of this, and it will be in the forefront of his mind, because you're absolutely right. Once the former Prime Minister lost control over the welfare reforms, that was really the end of his credibility.
Let's just talk a little bit about another key member of the new cabinet. He was in the old cabinet, Ed Miliband. There he was looking after energy. Now he is representing Britain on the world stage. Keir Starmer, I think most people would say, performed better in terms of his international and diplomatic role than he did on the domestic front. Do you think that Ed Miliband is the right man for the job when it comes to representing Andy Burnham's government on the world stage?
Well, we're about to find out. And of course, the role of Foreign Secretary is an odd one in the fact that so much of diplomacy now is transacted through leaders. But I think we're probably going to see Andy Burnham trying to step back from some of that and focus more on the domestic issues, insofar as you can separate those. And in lots of ways, obviously, you can't. So it might be that actually Ed Miliband has a more elevated or prominent role than his predecessors, Yvette Cooper and David Lammy, did.
Would that worry you?
We do know a few things about his foreign policy. I mean, I'm old enough to have reported on the vote on military action in Syria, where Ed Miliband led the Labour Party in opposing strikes on the Syrian regime for using chemical weapons.
I remember it too.
That scuppered US action, as you know, and many people feel that had significant repercussions in all sorts of parts of the world.
So I just need a one-word answer, really. But do you think Ed Miliband is the right man to represent Britain on the world stage?
Well, he already has. He's been representing the UK numerous climate summits and conferences around the world. So he does have the experience to do it. But I guess, how successfully that translates in a world where Donald Trump appears to have already taken against him in some respects remains to be seen.
James Lyons, former Downing Street Director of Strategic Communications for Keir Starmer. Thank you very much indeed for joining me on The Times at 1.